Welcome to the Stepmom Side with Alicia Crasco, the podcast for stepmoms ready to create the life they want and one they actually have a say in. Here we talk all things stepmom life and just a little bit more. Leave the superficial conversations at the door and get ready for perspective shifts and actionable advice to help you on your way to creating the life you want, one step at a time. Hi, Terance. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Doing well. How are you today?
I'm good. So can you tell my audience a little bit about you? What do you
Yes. So my name is Terance Dawkins. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I live in South Carolina, but I'm licensed in South Carolina and North Carolina. And I work at a university doing counseling in the counseling center with the students and also doing outreach with the students and on the college campus. But I also have my private practice that I do entitled Missing Pieces Counseling Services as well.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it really started where I was working for this agency, and one of my coworkers was like, "Why don't you start your own private practice?" And some of my clients were saying the same thing, and nobody, I never really thought that I could actually start a private practice. Like nobody ever told me like you could run a business. There was nothing or anybody that told me that. But then I started looking at really like numbers, to be honest.
Hmm.
And for example,
That's what it comes down to, like for me.
exactly like numbers.
Yeah.
Because if okay, you make $50 an hour. Oh my God, I'm making a whole bunch of money. I done made it. But let's really think about it. If insurance is paying that company $125 for you to see that client and you're getting 50,
Hmm.
then they made the rest of that money. And that's
Yep.
just off one client, and that adds up. And so I was like, hey, I could do this. So I started it, my own private practice, about 2 years ago. And the name came by because I was like, why do people go to counseling? It's like, well, maybe because they are missing something. They're trying to find like a missing piece. I was, oh, that's it,
I
Missing
love
Pieces Counseling
it.
Services. So that's how the name became about. And also, the other part of it is I personally feel like people have what they need in order to heal, in order to feel better, in order to manage some of the difficult things that they're going through, but they might not know how to arrange it.
Hmm.
So it's more of not not necessarily finding the missing piece, but learning how to arrange the puzzle so it actually makes sense.
I love that analogy. I've never heard that, but I think that's amazing.
So that's how that came about. That's how the name came about.
Okay. And so talk to me about what you specialize in. Like what do you like? Or I
Yeah,
should say like what do you like, but like what is like one or two like topics as far as like therapy go that like really light you up?
it started with depression and anxiety because I struggled with depression and anxiety mainly when I was in college. And when I became a therapist, everybody will always tell me, you need to find a niche. You need to find a niche. So find something that you really want to specialize in. And I was really stressing out because I really couldn't find out what that was. And I was like,
There's so many.
yeah, so many things. Like I don't know what I really was interested in. But then it came to where I was like, thought about my childhood and how I was raised. And I read this book called Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And it started talking about this concept called intergenerational trauma.
Hmm.
And as I continued to learn about it, read about it, research about it, I was like, well, this explains a lot about my childhood and why I act the way that I act now. And a lot of times people think that the things that they're going through started with them. They think that is because of them, or they think something's wrong with them. But I think it's very important after learning about this concept that people understand that it didn't start with you, meaning some of the things that you're experiencing was actually passed down to you from your parents and past generations, like
Hmm.
their parents. And so realizing that it didn't start with you can help you begin to heal. And intergenerational trauma is the passing down of trauma throughout generations. And that can be from our caregivers, from their caregivers. And it's just a continuous process that I try to help clients break the cycle.
Oh my gosh, yeah. When I saw what you were about, like that really stood out to me because the same thing happened here. And I think that when you're growing up, like, right, you don't know any better. Like you just think however you were brought up by whoever your caregivers were, like that's just the way that it went. And
Mm-hmm.
then you grow up and you can always look back on your childhood with an adult perspective, right?
Yep.
And was there any point that one day you were just like, wait a minute, this this wasn't about me. It was about what my caregivers learned, like it was passed down, because I agree, like the same thing happened to me. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I actually sat down after I learned about the concept. I sat down with my mom. I said, Mom, we need to have a conversation. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I just have some questions I want to ask because I was curious about her upbringing and her relationship with my grandmother and my grandfather. And so I sat down and I asked her some questions about that. And and I did this recently, probably like a couple of weeks ago. And it came to find out that some of the things that she was experiencing, like a core belief of I'm not doing enough, is the same core belief that I have. And which makes us then work all the time.
Right.
Or it makes us then not be satisfied with whatever we have at the moment because we're not doing enough. And what how that happened with her was she always had to be the caregiver for other people.
Hmm.
So, and she never really got validation for that. Nobody really ever helped her, so she felt like she had to do it on her own, and that's how I feel. So the same things that I saw through modeling from her, because she modeled those things, because my mama never really talked, and that's another thing I got from her. We don't
Hmm.
really talk about our feelings or emotions, because I can remember her sitting at a kitchen table one day, and her head was in her hands, and she was crying. I was like, Mom, what's wrong? And this is when I was a little kid. And she was like, nothing, I'm okay.
You're clearly not.
Clearly not. You're sitting at a kitchen table crying. So something's wrong. But she never talked about it.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. And I see that same thing with me. I'm always okay. I can't really talk about my feelings and emotions. I have to be strong because I don't want to feel weak. I can't
Oh my
let them
gosh.
know that I'm struggling. So
Yeah.
that just by seeing that, I adopted that.
Hmm.
And but it can also be passed down through biology through this concept called epigenetics, which is how genes are expressed, and it can be passed down that way too.
That is so wild. And I think that we don't realize, especially like that productivity part of like never being enough. Like I can
Mhm.
absolutely relate to that. Or, I can like, I also work from home. So if I can hear somebody coming, I'm like, I am busy, I am doing something. And then I'm like, it's okay for you just to not be doing anything. It's okay for you to just take up space in your own house and not have to be like constantly on or constantly doing something. But it
Mhm.
comes from that like never ever feeling like you were enough or like having to be that strong person. And God forbid you ever admit that something was wrong and
Yep.
like that be like a sign of weakness, right? And like crying, like in my family, was like definitely a sign of weakness. So talk to me about how when you work with a patient, what does leading them through working through their own things look like to like break those generational cycles?
So first we kind of identify what is this presenting problem you're coming to see me for. And it's always, and I ask that question just this because people come to therapy. For example, I saw this client today. He came because he was having marital issues and he wanted to work through those. I said, okay, so that's why you came, but let's really talk about why you're here. So I start
Mhm.
asking questions like, what was your relationship with your dad? What was your relationship with your mom? I also asked, what was their relationships like with their parents? And what do you know about that? And sometimes they know the answers to that question, sometimes they don't. And if they don't, that's fine. And we just start really unpacking these different relationships and how each person showed up in these different relationships. Then we can finally understand what happened to you. So with him specifically, he's told me that his father was abused by his dad. So his grandfather was abusive. And then he told me that happened. He got kicked out. His father got kicked out around 9 years old of the house
Mm.
and to go live with his aunt. So I asked him, I said, when did your depression start? He said around between 8 to 10. I said, okay. So tell me around what happened around 8 to 10. Okay, I was being bullied. Okay, so which abuse? Let's point that out. So I was being bullied. Okay, so what were some of these things you were thinking, or what were some of the beliefs you had? Well, I didn't deserve this, right? Or I'm always a target. I said, what does that sound like? Oh man, that sounds like my dad when he was abused by his father around 9 years old. I said, exactly. So your dad, and how was your dad when you were raised? He was never the disciplinarian. I said, why do you think that is? Probably because he was abused by his father and he didn't want to repeat the same pattern.
Mhm.
But by not repeating that pattern, he then passed on to you the feeling of, I'm always the target, or I didn't deserve this type thing. So we started to work on that part of it. And now I told him, now the issue is not that you have problems with your marriage. It's probably because you're feeling so depressed that you don't feel like doing anything and you don't have any motivation or energy to do anything. And now your wife is upset because you don't do what you're supposed to do. But
Mhm.
it's not because of the marriage, it's because you have some unresolved issues that you're not working on that's then causing the byproduct of relationship problems in your marriage.
Yeah,
So we
I
just try to connect dots
got it.
ultimately.
So let me ask you this. When you start with like, okay, so that's why you're here, but like, or like, that's what the problem is, but why are you here? And then, they say whatever. And then you're like, what was your relationship like with your parents or your grandparents? Or do people ever say, well, that's not why I'm here. Or I'm not here to talk about that. Do you ever get that?
I don't get that
No, you
because
don't. Okay.
I don't get that because I what I do is I listen and I acknowledge what they say, but then I then ask the questions that I want to ask, but I never dismiss what they have to say. If they start going a tangent and start talking about something else, I don't interrupt. I just allow them to finish what
Mhm.
they say because I listen to not only what they say, but what they don't say. So
Yeah.
some of the things that when they go on this tangent are clues that can help me in my next question with trying to determine some of this family history.
I love that. Yeah, I saw earlier, like when off recording, like you were like taking notes. I would say, just like in my limited time with you, that you are a good listener and you're like very attentive. Like I can see it. I'm
Thank you.
like, oh, yeah, you're welcome. So when people like come to you and they're trying to work through, like, okay, I'm having issues in my marriage, or I'm having issues with my stepkids, or I'm having issues with extended family or whatever, and you go back and you connect the dots and you're realizing like, okay, I see the things that I need to unlearn, or I see the things that maybe weren't the best way that I was brought up, or the best things that I was taught. How do you work with somebody on unlearning that? Because I think that's the hard part. Like you're already hardwired to like
Yeah.
live like this. Like what are steps people can take to unlearn
So I
or
think one of
rewire
the
themselves?
biggest things is being aware of where things are coming from. Because if I'm aware of it, then I could then choose to do something different to change it. But if I'm not aware of it, I'm just going to keep doing the same patterns over and over and over. But one thing that I learned when I was researching this topic and that I implemented in my practice is in order to unlearn something, you have to have a different experience
Hmm.
because the original behavior happened from an experience you had or
Hmm.
didn't have. So, in order to heal from it, you have to create a new experience. And sometimes that means healing your relationship with parents or caregivers that cause some of the trauma or pass down some of the trauma. But sometimes you can't. So, what we do is we kind of trick our brain. That's what I call it. I call it tricking the brain. So, it's kind of a mindfulness meditation to where we do a visualization of what you didn't receive or didn't have, and that could be my mom telling me that she loves me. That could be my mom showing or my dad showing me affection. That could be me speaking to my younger self and telling my younger self that I am enough, or that I'm protected, that I'm safe and I'm secure. And then what you're doing with the brain at that point is the brain doesn't know that this experience is real, so
Hmm.
it's helping you then create what we call neuroplasticity, which is changing kind of how the brain is functioning. Because now I have a visualization of a new experience. I can operate off that new experience and not the old one.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you touched on like the neuroplasticity, because like affirmations and like the meditation that you talked about, like affirmations, yeah, if you, however you talk to your body, your brain doesn't know if that's real or if it's not. So,
Mhm.
and I guess I've never really thought about it like that when you're like having these visualizations of like, oh, I wish I had the affection from whichever caregiver or all of them, or I am enough. And I think that's like the hard part is if you've got kids that you've got in the house
Hmm.
and you're going through this generational trauma and like breaking those cycles, it's almost like you're parenting two people. Like you're healing your inner child, and then you're also trying to like parent a better way. So it's
Yep.
like you're getting it from both sides, if you will. Like there's like this inner turmoil that's going on that you're trying to correct and trying to like get right. But then also like try not to give too much trauma to this other person as well.
Yeah, and I like the way that you put that because, like I said, the biggest part is awareness. So if I do
Mhm.
have a child and I'm aware of what triggers me, I'm aware of where it comes from, I can then be aware and be cognizant of how I then show up and react to my child so that I then
100%.
can break the cycle from being passed down to them. So I love the way you said that. And that's the most important thing is realizing how you're passing along to other people, whether that's your children or whether how you're showing up to other people. Because some of the things that trigger us from our early childhood experiences doesn't just have to impact children, it can impact our partners and our
Yeah.
relationships or our friends because we show up a certain way because we're triggered by a past experience or that's how things were modeled to us. Another thing that he mentioned was my dad never knew how to communicate because they always communicated excuse me, they always communicated through aggression. So now, how am I going to communicate? Through aggression,
Aggression.
because that's all I saw. And now, how does that impact my relationship with my partner, my friends, and then now, how does my children see that? But if I'm aware of it, I can choose not to respond with aggression, and that doesn't get passed down to my children.
Yeah. And I think that's the hardest part is once you're aware of it. Like I was just coaching somebody yesterday about this. Because I had to go through it, like part of my story is my very first year of marriage, I Googled how to get divorced basically nightly because I was like, this is hard. Like I did not sign up for this. Like this is really hard. But a lot of my own childhood stuff was showing up and like affecting the way that I was showing up and being present or not showing up and not being present, right? But once you are aware of that, it's hard to have those conversations with yourself. Like I said, I was coaching somebody yesterday and I was telling her it's the craziest thing because once you get better at this, you'll be in the middle of something and this old cycle that you used to be into, and you'll be doing it. And then all of a sudden something will click and you're like, no, I don't want to do that. And then you do like a complete 180. So it
Hmm.
probably looks like a crazy person to like the person that you're talking to because all of a sudden your brain's like, hey, you know what, Alicia? We're not doing that, remember? And then, but you're in the middle of maybe you're arguing with somebody or maybe you're, parenting a way that you don't want to parent. And then you're like, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. I don't want to be doing this. And there's so much humility that comes from that. And there's a lot of vulnerability that comes from just being honest and like owning whatever it is right when it's happening and just being like, okay, give me a second. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to like go down this path. What I meant to say was not the crazy stuff you just heard or
Yeah,
not the behavior that I just exhibited, but it's hard to do that because it's embarrassing or, there's shame that's around that or, like people don't want to show like that not so great side of yourself or they think that growth is linear, right?
hmm,
Like once I start on this path, like I'm going to be good. And it's not like, it's not just like, okay, I'm starting, everything's going to be perfect. Sometimes you're going to take one step forward and sometimes you're going to take like 30 steps back. Small progress is still progress, right?
it is. And you said shame, and that's a lot of times we don't know our family history or some of the traumas that our parents or grandparents experienced because of shame of
Hmm.
the experience or because of guilt. And that's a key component in the intergenerational concept is we don't know these things because they're never talked about.
Hmm.
So they're just swept under the rug, and only thing that we see is now the behaviors that come from it. So that's why I sat down with my mom to try to understand where did these things come from, so I can better not only understand myself but practice what I'm teaching my clients to do, which
Hmm.
is to heal from these things that we don't want to exhibit anymore. These different behaviors,
Hmm.
and when I do have children, I don't pass it down to them.
Yeah. So at first your mom was like, what do you want to talk about? At the end, was she a little more open about it?
Well, see, I'm not gonna lie, I was concerned because, like I said, my mom growing up never talked about her feelings, never.
Mine
And
either.
I was like, I don't know how she's gonna respond to these questions.
Okay.
But surprisingly, she was very open. And if she didn't know anything, she was like, hey, I really don't know that. But she was very open and honest with me. She told me things that I didn't know about how she was feeling growing up and everything like that. And she was like, I don't know that, but you need to ask your aunt. She probably knows that answer. So she not only was helping me
Oh,
with answering my questions, but she was guiding me in another direction to get the other answers to the questions that she didn't have.
I love that. Like, I love that she was open about it because I
Yeah.
think, like, my family doesn't talk about things like that either. And I can tell you right now, 100%, like, my mom would not be open to that kind of
I was
conversation.
nervous. I'm not
All
gonna lie.
right.
Nervous and scared. I was like, this ain't real. But she surprised me. She really did. And I told her that she surprised me. And she's definitely grown a lot since I was younger. And our relationship has definitely gotten a lot better to where now I feel like she trusts me enough to be open and honest to talk about these different things. And that helps me, not only, personally, but as a therapist as well.
Yeah. So I think that whatever you're going through in your personal life, obviously, like in our world, like translates into our work too, right?
Mhm.
Do you ever feel like you are psychoanalyzing somebody, like even if it is your family member, like when you're talking to them?
All the time, all the time. And it's funny
Tell me
because
what you really think.
my sister told me, "You're not my therapist," and I'm like, "I'm not trying to be. It just happens. I'm sorry."
I know,
Because
yeah.
because like you said, I just try to listen to what people actually really are saying with the words they use or what they're not saying,
Mhm.
and that kind of helps me determine the true issue and true problem. And that's another thing with being aware of where some of these things are coming from, because if I'm aware of it, I can then know how I can communicate the true
Yeah.
problem.
Mhm.
And that's where in relationships, whether that's with partners or whether that's with children or friends, that's where the issue becomes into play, is because there's a event that happens and we respond to the event, but that's not what really bothered us.
Mhm.
It's how the event made us feel, and then we're not able to communicate that. But if I'm aware of where it's coming from, I can communicate what's really going on, and then we can truly address the issue in order to fix the problem.
Yeah, I love that because yeah, it's usually you're treating the symptom and it's
Mhm.
not the root of the problem. And so you really have to dig deep. And I see that a lot with stepmoms that I coach too. It's like, okay, what's going on? And then they tell you something. And like you, like I've been through a lot of the exact same things that they've been through. And I'm like, okay, so that's a little bit of like the symptom of it, but like what's really like going on underneath that part of it, and asking why and like being curious about it really gets me a lot of answers as to like what's actually going on. Same thing about like what they say or like what they're not saying, because you can see a lot with like their body language. So let me ask you this. So when you get somebody to recognize like, or they become aware of what they're doing or how they're showing up and they want to break that cycle, how do you, or maybe you don't, I don't know, teach them accountability? Or is
Yeah.
that part of like anything that you practice?
Well, it's another thing that I like to help guide people with through is accepting what they didn't have or didn't receive and accepting how that impacted them.
Hmm.
So it's more of, again, you can do the visualizations, but I asked them to do certain behaviors when they leave here.
Hmm.
So that could be admitting that I'm sorry, I messed up, I overreacted, but this is why.
Hmm.
Or that could be, I want you to sit and pay attention to what you're feeling and what you're thinking in the moment that something is happening. And then you can respond to that, not exactly what just happened. So just to help them accept and take accountability is becoming aware of it and then acknowledging what they did wrong, or acknowledging to themselves and to their partners or children, hey, I'm sorry, I overreacted. Hey, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have acted that way. But it's more of taking that accountability because you know where it's coming from. Because a lot of times when you're not aware of it, and people do this all the time, including me, including myself, we will react, but we think we're right.
Right. The self-righteousness.
Yeah, we like,
Yeah.
no, you're wrong and I'm right. But no,
100%.
you're wrong because you're you're wrong because you reacted wrong, and this is where it comes from. So if I'm aware of where it comes from, I then can accept that I was wrong and I'm
Yeah.
not right in the situation.
Right. Yeah. I like that part of it. And I see that too. I mean, I absolutely 100% did that, and I was willing to die on the hills, like stupid hills that I should never been willing to die on, right? Like I gave
Mhm.
away my power so many times. I had no idea, but my husband is like shaking me like, you're giving away your power, and I'm like, whatever, no, I'm not. I'm willing to die on this hill, right? But now, like, hindsight's always 2020. It's so wild how that works. But now looking back, I can see like, yeah, there were so many things that I like, so many battles that I picked, like, for what? Like, I wasted so much energy, I gave away so much power, and there was way too much pride and ego standing in my way to be like, you're actually wrong, or you don't know enough about the subject to be speaking on it, or to make these kinds of decisions, especially like as the stepmom. And like, that's really hard to go from somebody that is like super independent and like,
Mhm.
I'm so good at running my life, like, let me run yours, to basically having not really much control over my life, or what I felt like was not a lot of control over my life, because people were coming and going, and like, I didn't have a say because so much was decided about like schedules prior to me showing up on the picture. And so, or like showing up in the picture. And it's just like, this is a power struggle. And I turned it into a power struggle, because that's something that I learned like it was something that I didn't have as a kid. Like I didn't feel like there was any like structure or like control structure more, but like in my household. So I needed to control the outcome of everything for me to feel safe.
Yeah.
Well, that's ridiculous. Like I can't control the outcome, or I can't control like what other people are doing, if you can believe that, like in a family that's not even actually mine.
And when you bring up feeling safe and secure, another thing that comes up with intergenerational trauma that I really talk about with my clients is the attachment theory.
Oh
So
my gosh,
learning
yeah.
how exactly you show up because of the attachment style you have. Do you feel secure in your relationships with people or partner? Or do you feel anxious, meaning I don't know what I'm going to get, so I feel anxious, like I gotta fix it, I gotta do something, and that can overwhelm someone when you do that. Am I avoidant, meaning I kind of shy away from intimacy, or I shy away from feelings or physical touch because my parents never really showed that to me, and that really just seems weird to me, so I don't want that. That's too much for me. Or is it disorganized to where the people that you was supposed to feel secure with is then causing you the harm. So now I'm confused and I don't know exactly where safety and security is. So now I have a disorganized attachment style. So really learning that as well can help you feel, can help you show up differently in relationships.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Once I figured out like where I fell into like those categories, then I was like, oh, but like why? Again, getting curious about it. Why do you fall into these different categories?
Mhm.
Okay, so now we know why. What can I do now to rectify that?
Yep.
Like I was always like, oh my gosh, I made a mistake, or I flew off the handle and my husband's leaving me. And he'd be
Yep.
like, what is wrong with you? Like, I'm not leaving. Like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, we're married. Never mind the fact that I was the one that was like, how do you get divorced in Michigan? Right? Like, never mind the fact that I was the one that was like, I need to get out of here. Like, I've got to run because I don't know. I don't feel safe. I don't
Exactly.
feel like, and so it definitely was eye-opening to me, like how much baggage I had, because I was like, I don't have any baggage. Like, I've never been married. I don't have any kids. Like, you're the one that's been married. You're the one that's got kids. You're bringing the baggage, right? It's easy to point
Exactly.
fingers at other people. But then you're like, wait a minute. Okay, I am the problem. Like, I am the one that's self-sabotaging. Like
Yep.
compare, like my husband and I, like our upbringings are similar, but he had two parents, like safe, loving household, where my parents are divorced. My dad was absent. And so like it factors into like how you show up. And I'm like, oh, that's not a good day when you're looking in the mirror and you're realizing I am the problem. Like,
Exactly.
I'm the one doing all this.
Because we carry these different burdens, as I like to call them, with
Mhm.
us throughout our lives, and sometimes we're not aware of what these burdens are. But
Or you
these
don't want to see
burdens,
them.
and you don't want to see them. You don't want to acknowledge that they're there,
Yeah.
and sometimes these burdens can get so heavy, and then that's when people might seek out therapy. That's when people might, like you said, fly off the handle. But there comes a point in time where if you can release these burdens that didn't belong to you in the beginning because of these traumas that happened to you or these traumas that were passed down to you, you will feel so much lighter. And after we have done some of this work together, some of my clients actually said that, like, I just feel like a weight has been lifted off me
Yeah.
because I was carrying that for so long.
Yeah. And the whole like, it's not my fault, right? Like, you can't control how you were brought up. Like, you
Hmm.
didn't ask to be born, like you were, and you can't control the environment that you were brought up in. But then at some point, you have to take ownership of your past or it's going to control you.
Yeah.
Right.
And
And so
what
I
I like
love
to
that you went
tell
through that.
people is you can't control what happened, but you can control how you respond.
Yeah. I
So
like
that's what
that.
I like to tell them.
So when people are working through like how to break these cycles, and now they're working on like, okay, I see what my triggers are. I'm aware of it. I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on what's going on and like how I'm going to work going forward. I'm good. Like, I'm good. I don't need help anymore. What do you say to people that say that?
Typically, I'm trying to figure out the word I want to use. Let's just say I decrease the appointment time frame. So I start seeing people probably like every other week, so twice a month. And
Okay.
then when they feel like they're getting better, I say, okay, let's see how things go with 3 weeks instead of two. Let's do that for a few months to see how that works out. Because every other week you get that like check in, like, okay, I
Hmm.
got it, and we're good. But if you go like 3 weeks, 3 weeks or a month, and really doing things on your own, you can really see how you're doing and seeing if you're getting better or managing things better. Because as a therapist, I really believe I don't fix people. And some
Hmm.
people, they be like, "Oh, come fix me. I need to be fixed. Something's wrong." Well, nothing's really wrong with you. You just need a little assistance figuring out how to manage some of these things. So I don't fix you. What I do is give you some tools to use in order for you to be able to manage these things a little bit better,
Hmm.
because you still might be triggered by these different events. But again, how do you respond to these events? So if
Right.
I'm triggered by something, but I respond differently, I think I'm doing pretty good. So that's
Yeah.
what I really try to teach them, is that don't think I'm going to change the way you think. Don't think I'm going to change your thoughts. Don't think I'm going to change how you feel about certain things. But if you can manage it better than when you started, then I think we have gotten progress.
Yeah. I think that's 100% valid. Like, I told you, I was Googling like how to get divorced. But I was like, okay, we have to get help. Like, this isn't working. Like, something needs to change. But like, getting help was not normalized in my family. So
Mhm.
I like didn't tell anyone. But then also like no one knew that I was struggling, right? Because God, we can't do that either. And then I remember like being in marriage counseling and being like, is this my life? Like, am I going to be here forever? And I was terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, like something's wrong with me. Like, I'm going to be here forever. Not recognizing that, like, and I love that you said tools. Like, I'm going to be able to like equip myself with the help through our therapist. Like, okay, here's how you can rework things, right? And it's all about responding versus reacting. And once you get that down, and here's where I failed, Terrence, to be honest with you, at the beginning, because I could list off like 8 million different things that were going wrong. And I was going to fix all 8 million things at once. Right. Which is always a terrible idea. Right. But I didn't, I was like, not me. Like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do it awesome. Like, watch. Like, maybe like 24 hours later, I was burnt out. Right. Like, shockingly, I was burnt out. And so she's like, Alicia, you can't do that. Like, you can't just go all in. Like, that's awesome. Like, that's admirable. You can't just do that. You've got to do one thing at a time. Otherwise, you're just going to be overwhelmed and you're not going to do anything. So to kind of speak to your client, like, you're just going to be like, I'm not doing anything. And then, your partner's going to be like, well, like you're not even fun to be around, or I don't even want to be with you because you're just like this blob now, right?
Yep.
And then like the frustration and like the resentment builds up because apparently I'm the only one that's struggling because everyone else is like perfectly fine, but I've got 8 million things that are wrong. And so just like taking one thing at a time and like getting a handle on that, and then adding something else and getting a handle on that, and then adding something else and getting a handle on that. And like again, to like the growth isn't linear thing. It's I thought like, oh, I'm just gonna like explode, like I'm just gonna grow like crazy. No, it wasn't. It was like a gradual increase of things. And I was frustrated. Like like super ambitious, like all these goals, like we're gonna do it, like we're gonna crush it. And then like when reality hit, I was like, dang, this is not like again, like this isn't what I signed up for. Like I wanted everything to like happen like yesterday. Like that would have been really
Exactly.
great.
And I tell people all the time, you might have slip ups.
Yeah.
You might have slip ups, and
Okay.
that doesn't mean you're back at square one. But how do you recover from that slip up is what you really need to pay attention to. So you might react in a not so well way to a situation, and but then next time it happens, you do it the right way.
Yeah.
So I tell people to trust yourself because you're equipped. Like I told you earlier, I feel like people have the tools that they need already, but they just don't know how to use them or arrange them. So I tell them you're going to make mistakes, and that's fine. Everybody does. But how do you recover from it, and what are you going to do next about the mistake you made?
Yeah. 100%. And I'd say that to the clients that I coach too. And I also have them like, I feel like in life for sure, everything's cyclical, right? Like it's just going to keep coming back. But especially with step family things, like, like the kids' mom's always going to be there. Like she's not going anywhere. So there's going to be something like if there's something that you guys have an issue with, like it's going to keep coming up, like until you guys get a handle on it, it's just going to keep coming up. So I always
Mhm.
tell some moms that I work with, like, okay, if you know that this issue is coming up, and however you handled it in the past didn't go well, write about it. Like, okay, what happened? What was your reaction? Why didn't that work? Now let's brainstorm. Like, what are other ways that you could respond? What are other things that you could do? Okay, great. So now that we have those, like, let's practice those. If
Mhm.
she responds late, like 10 o'clock at night, I'm not going to respond until the next morning. That's okay. The world's not going to catch on fire. Like, it's okay for you to set boundaries. You don't have to say, I'm setting a boundary. Like, I'm not responding to you until tomorrow morning or whenever it is, but just practicing that because I feel like I know that you play like you practice, right? So if you can like rewire whatever it was that you were doing before and like retrain what you're thinking, like, okay, this is what I'm going to say when the situation comes up because I know it's coming up, or this is what I'm going to do when the situation comes up because I know it's coming up. So then when that situation presents, you can just regurgitate whatever it was that you practiced or whatever. So yeah, just like you said, like that's awesome.
And I love that tool you just use, and because it's like a behavioral analysis chart ultimately. But what
Mhm.
you're doing is slowing down the thought process of what the brain is doing like automatically. Okay, what's the problem? Why is this a problem? How do I feel about it? What am I going to do next? So our brain does that like real fast, but you're
Yeah.
actually teaching people how to slow it down to figure out some of these different areas and components that comes to making a decision. And that's some of the things that I do with my clients as well, is slowing your thought process down so you can make a more logical
Mhm.
decision.
Yeah. And for me, I'm like, it's becoming aware of like what part you play in it, right? Like it's easy to be, well, he said, she said, or he did, she did, whatever. All right, that's cool. Like we know this. What part did you play? Well, I didn't do anything.
Yeah,
Well,
he did.
yeah, you did. Like there's a part that you played too, right? Like, so like where does that come in, right? If somebody like texts late at night, you don't need to send a nasty text back saying, "Hey, dummy, like you're not supposed to be texting after whatever time or emailing or whatever." You don't have to go to every battle that you're invited to.
Mhm.
Shocking. But yeah, I like the idea and the concept of like being aware of what's actually happening. And so like, yeah, like you said, like slowing that thought process down and actually like logically thinking through things. Like I'm more of like a logical thinker and just breaking the steps down. And it's okay for you to come back and revisit it. Like you don't have to respond to anything like right away. And even now, like sometimes I'm like, you know what? Give me 5 minutes. I need to get myself out of the situation because I can already feel like my blood is boiling. Give me a second. Well, let's rejoin in 5 minutes. Honestly, it's probably more like an hour. But like, we're going to rejoin at this time, this day. And then I will have like worked through something. But I just need to process some things on my own. And I think that's another thing about like everyone processes things differently. Everyone's got their own lens, right? Everyone's got their
Mhm.
own baggage of whatever. And it doesn't even have to be like marriage related. Like they've all got their own personal stuff. And so everyone views things differently. And whenever we're like, well, Terance, you said this, and I'm projecting on you because I've got my own lens that I'm looking at you through, or I'm looking at your behavior through, not accounting for the fact that maybe you sent me a short message because you're in the middle of like walking your dog and like all of a sudden just like she actually yanked the leash or whatever, right? And so just taking that step back to be like, okay, we don't need to respond right away. Everyone's got their own thing going on. Like, let's respond to just like the factual things that are in whatever your communication is, whether it's a phone call, a text, an email, and just respond to that and not the emotional part, which I think is really hard for like people with brains to
Oh, it
actually.
definitely it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard for us all because we what ultimately happens is our nervous system gets activated. And
Mm-hmm.
once that starts to happen, different area of your brain starts firing off and you start interpreting things different ways. And then you start remembering past situations
Yeah.
that kind of was similar. And now you're responding to that and your brain just does a whole bunch of stuff. But what you're ultimately trying to do when you react is trying to calm down your nervous system so that you can get back to a technical word would be homeostasis, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
equilibrium.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you're trying to calm yourself back down. And then once we calm ourselves down, that's when you look back and be like, okay, I overreacted. That's because your nervous system isn't heightened anymore and your brain isn't really firing off like it was. So that's another thing that I really try to help my clients with is trying to calm their nervous system down, whether that's through mindfulness practices, guided meditations, or other coping skills that they might enjoy. So that's ultimately what's happening when situations like that occur.
Okay. So when they're able to like look back and hindsight's 2020 and it is not as nice as you would like it to be, can you speak a little bit to like the repair part of it?
Yeah. So again, it's more of being aware, acknowledging that you were wrong. So I'm a big component about communication and communication using I statements. So I statements would be something like, I felt upset when I did not hear from you.
Mhm.
So another way I could have said that was, I didn't hear from you. What were you doing?
Mhm.
So that one sounds more of attacking, but you're
Mhm.
not really addressing what the true issue was. It was more of how what they didn't respond made you feel. That's what you're truly responding to and what made you upset. So the repair process starts with acknowledging what you're feeling, what you did wrong or why you did it, and also adding in what you need in order to feel better. That's the key component I think people leave out a lot of times. So that could look like something like, I felt ignored when I didn't hear from you. Next time, could you just let me know if you're busy? Because
Mhm.
then my nervous system wouldn't be firing off because I wouldn't think you're ignoring me. I was just thinking you're walking your dog,
Right.
or you have some other things going on, and I'll just wait until you finish, or you can respond when you have time. So
Yeah. And I like that you use I statements because I do too. But I'll be honest with you, when I learned how to use I statements, I thought this is dumb. I am not in fifth grade. I am not 5 years old. I feel sad when, I was like, this is so corny, but I had to practice them. And even as I was practicing them for a while, I was like, this is ridiculous.
yeah,
I I sound so elementary. But when you can like distill it down to like that basic part of it, and like you said, when you can be honest about like what the actual cause is, like I felt sad because I felt like you were ignoring me. I felt annoyed that whatever. Then it's like that clear communication of like this is what the problem was.
now
So
we
I
can
love
fix it.
yeah,
Or now
right.
we can repair that. So and I had someone tell me this the other day, stop focusing on the event and really
Mm.
let's focus on what the event caused, how the event caused you to feel, or the true issue. The true issue isn't the event. The true issue is how the event made you feel and how you interpreted the event. So let's talk about that instead of what actually happened.
Yeah, 100%. Because there's whatever emotion came up, whatever's triggered you, like that's really what we need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, that's so good. Okay, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. Like, I love this. I'm like, I could talk to you, I think, all night. Like, I'm like, I love this. Like, it's super nerdy and like super darky because I've done like a bunch of like research on it. Like, I've been through it myself. But tell me, where do you live online? Or tell my audience, like, where do you live online? Like, what do you have going on?
Yes, so you can visit me on my website, which is www.missingpiecescounselingllc.com. On Facebook, it's Missing Pieces Counseling, and on Instagram, it's Missing Pieces Counseling.
All right.
So, um, upcoming, what I do have is I'll be presenting in Jacksonville, Florida on intergenerational trauma coming up in September. So that'll be my next big event that I'll be doing. But I do plan to have different workshops and trainings that I'm going to be offering as well. And to get information about that, it'll be on the website or on social medias and things like that.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this week's episode. If anything was helpful or resonated with you, please share it on social media and tag me. I'm just at Alicia Crosco. And if you could leave a 5-star rating and a review while you're at it, that would also be really helpful. And if you find yourself struggling with your stepmom journey and you want a little bit more support without the hefty price tag of coaching, you might want to check out the Stepmom Side community, which is my own private community for stepmoms, where you get to connect with other stepmoms around the world and myself, where I hold weekly office hours and monthly group coaching. It's kind of like you have your own personal coach in your own back pocket. Again, without that hefty price tag. See you next week.